Sri Lankan Egg Hopper. The egg hopper is one of the clearest examples of how an omelette can stop being a flat sheet of egg and become an entire edible structure. It begins with a thin fermented batter made from rice flour, coconut milk, and either toddy or yeast, rested until it develops a light sourness and enough life to spread into fragile bubbles. That batter is poured into a small curved hopper pan and quickly swirled so the edges climb the walls while the center remains thicker. Then an egg is cracked into the middle, sitting naturally inside the bowl the batter has created. The rim turns crisp, almost lace-like, while the base stays soft and slightly chewy. So the first bite gives crunch, coconut, tang, and tender egg all at once. This contrast is what makes the dish feel more complex than its ingredients suggest. Hoppers have been part of Sri Lankan cooking for centuries, connected to South Indian appam traditions, and to older fermented rice batters used across the region. The English name came through colonial contact, but the dish itself remained firmly local. In Sri Lanka, it is almost never eaten alone. It is served with sambals, coconut relishes, chili pastes, curries, or sini sambal, turning a simple egg breakfast into a complete meal. The curved pan matters as much as the batter. A regular flat skillet cannot create the raised walls, the crisp edges, or the nest shape that lets the egg cook gently from trapped heat. At street stalls, the movement is fast and practiced. Ladle, swirl, crack, cover, serve. The result looks delicate, but the method is built from years of repetition. Classic French omelette. The French omelette is defined less by what goes into it than by what must not happen to it. It should not brown, puff, crisp, or harden. It should remain pale yellow, smooth on the outside, and barely set within, almost like warm custard folded inside a satin skin. That restraint is what separates it from most egg dishes in the world. The cook beats the eggs only enough to combine them, seasons lightly, then works them over moderate low heat while constantly stirring and shaking the pan. The motion breaks up curds before they become firm, keeping the texture fine and tender. Then, just before the surface is completely set, the omelette is folded into a neat oval and turned out seam side down. Tea heat timing is unforgiving. A few seconds too long, and the interior becomes dry. A few seconds too early, and it collapses into raw egg. French cooking schools treat this dish as a quiet test because it reveals whether someone understands heat, speed, and touch. The omelette existed in French homes long before classical chefs formalized it, and the word likely moved through older French forms, connected to the Latin idea of a thin plate. Eggs were also important in medieval religious diets, especially during periods when meat was restricted, which helped make dishes like this practical and familiar. Fillings are optional and usually modest. Herbs, a little soft cheese, or finely cut mushrooms may be added, but anything heavy would defeat the point. The French omelette is not trying to overwhelm. Its entire identity is precision, softness, and control. When done correctly, the fork meets almost no resistance, and the egg seems to melt rather than crumble. Kuku Sabzi. Kuku Sabzi is often described as a Persian herb omelette, but that description can be misleading because the egg is not the star. The herbs are. Parsley, cilantro, dill, fenugreek, scallions, and sometimes chives are chopped in large quantities, then held together with beaten egg and occasionally a little flour or baking powder. The mixture becomes deep green before it ever reaches the pan. In many versions, the herbs outnumber the egg so heavily that the egg functions more like glue than the main ingredient. This is why the finished dish eats more like a dense herb cake than a normal frittata. Kuku Sabzi is closely tied to Nowruz, the Persian New Year, celebrated at the spring equinox. Green foods symbolize renewal, growth, and the return of life after winter, making this dish especially meaningful on the holiday table. Some households mix in walnuts for crunch or dried barberries for sharp tartness, creating small bursts of contrast inside the herbal richness. The flavor is intense, grassy, savory, and slightly bitter in a way that feels deliberate rather than harsh. Fenugreek gives it an earthy note that can seem almost sweet in the background. The cooking method varies. It may be started on the stovetop, baked in the oven, or flipped like a thick pancake, but the goal is usually the same, a darkened exterior with a moist, compact interior. It can be eaten hot, room temperature, or cold, which makes it practical for gatherings and holiday tables where dishes sit out for hours. Served with flatbread, rice, yogurt, or pickles, Kuku Sabzi shows how eggs can quietly support another ingredient while still shaping the dish, Tamagoyaki. Tamagoyaki is Japan's layered rolled omelette, built not in one pour, but in a sequence of thin sheets. Beaten eggs are seasoned with soy sauce, mirin, sugar, and sometimes dashi, then cooked layer by layer in a rectangular pan. Each layer is allowed to set just enough before being rolled to one side. More egg is added, the roll is lifted slightly so the liquid runs underneath, and the process repeats until the omelette becomes a compact log. When sliced, the cross-section reveals a soft spiral or stacked layers, showing the entire history of its cooking. The flavor balance changes by region and household. Tokyo-style versions often lean sweeter, while Kansai versions tend to be lighter and more savory. That difference is subtle but meaningful in Japanese food culture, where small seasoning choices often carry local identity. The rectangular pan, called a makiyaki nabe or Tamagoyaki pan, gives the cook control over thickness and shape. Without it, the same dish can be made, but the clean edges and even roll are much harder to achieve. Tamagoyaki appears everywhere, from home kitchens to sushi counters. In bento boxes, it is valued because it holds its shape, tastes good cold, and adds sweetness beside rice and salty side dishes. In sushi restaurants, it may be served as nigiri or as a final test of the chef's egg technique, sometimes sweeter, denser, and more refined. Texture is crucial. It should be springy but tender, firm enough to slice, yet still moist inside. The sweetness should not feel like dessert. It should sit beside soy, mirin, and egg richness, creating the gentle, sweet, savory profile that makes Japanese egg cooking so recognizable. Tortilla de Patatas. Tortilla de Patatas, also called tortilla española, is Spain's thick potato omelette and one of the country's most familiar everyday foods. The name can confuse outsiders because it has nothing to do with the Mexican tortilla. In Spain, the word refers to a round cake-like form, and this version is made from potatoes, eggs, olive oil, and sometimes onion. The potatoes are sliced or diced and cooked slowly in a generous amount of olive oil until tender, not fried, into crisp chips, but softened into rich, silky pieces. They are then mixed with beaten eggs and cooked again until the whole mass sets into a thick, round cake. The result sits between an omelet, a frittata, and a potato gratin, dense enough to feed a group but simple enough for everyday use. Its origin is debated, though many accounts connect it to 19th century northern Spain, especially Navarra, during periods of conflict when cheap, filling ingredients were valuable. Whether it began as soldier food, farmhouse cooking, or something in between, it spread because it solved a practical problem beautifully. Few dishes turn eggs and potatoes into something so portable, filling, and adaptable. The biggest argument around tortilla is onion. Some Spaniards insist onion is essential because it adds sweetness and moisture. Others believe a proper tortilla needs only potato and egg. The center is another dividing line. Some prefer it fully set, sliceable and sturdy. Others want it loose and creamy enough to gently flow when cut. In bars, it is served in wedges at room temperature, often with bread or as part of a tapa. Its power comes from familiarity. It is not flashy, but it belongs to daily life. Egg Foo Young. Egg Foo Young is a Chinese-origin egg patty that became especially famous through American Chinese restaurants. In its most recognizable restaurant form, beaten eggs are mixed with bean sprouts, scallions, onions, and a protein such as shrimp, pork, chicken, or crab, then fried into thick, golden patties and covered with a glossy brown gravy. That sauce, usually soy-based and thickened with cornstarch, is what many Western diners associate with the dish, even though it is not central to the older Cantonese idea behind it. The name comes from Cantonese words connected poetically to the hibiscus flower, suggesting something soft, pale, and delicate. Earlier versions were often lighter, sometimes using egg whites with seafood, and were closer to a refined cloud-like preparation than the heavy, gravy-covered patties common in takeout containers. Chinese immigrants brought related techniques to the United States during the 19th century, especially during the Gold Rush and Railroad era. As Chinese restaurants adapted to American ingredients, expectations, and portion sizes, Egg Foo Young changed. It became heartier, darker, saucier, and more filling. A good version still depends on air and heat. The beaten egg should puff when it hits hot oil, giving the outside a crisp, lightly chewy edge while keeping the inside tender and almost soufflé-like. Bean sprouts add moisture and crunch, scallions add sharpness, and the protein gives substance. In Cantonese restaurants that prepare it closer to its roots, the gravy may be absent, the seafood finer, and the texture much more delicate. This creates a wide gap between versions. One is a light Cantonese egg dish, the other is a beloved American Chinese comfort food. Both share ancestry, but they express different restaurant cultures. Thai Kai Jiao. Kai Jiao is Thailand's crisp puffed omelet, and its method is almost the opposite of the French version. Instead of avoiding color, it chases it. Instead of slow heat and softness, it uses very hot oil and speed. The eggs are beaten with fish sauce, sometimes a little lime juice, water, or cornstarch, then poured from a height into shimmering oil. The mixture spreads, bubbles, and puffs almost instantly, creating ragged, lacy edges and a deeply golden surface. The center remains moist, but the outside becomes crisp enough to crackle in places. Fish sauce is essential because it seasons the egg with saltiness, umami, and a slight briny depth that plain salt cannot match. It also helps the omelette brown quickly, giving the dish its characteristic color and aroma. Kai Jiao is one of Thailand's most practical meals. It can be made in minutes, served over hot jasmine rice, and finished with prick nam pla or chili sauce. It is eaten for breakfast, lunch, dinner, or late-night hunger without much ceremony. Street vendors, home cooks, and small restaurants all make it because it is cheap, fast, and satisfying. Fillings can be added with minced pork, crab, shrimp, or chopped vegetables being common, but the plain version remains important because it proves the technique. The oil must be hot enough for instant puffing. The egg must be seasoned strongly enough to stand up to rice. The finished omelet should look irregular rather than neat, with curled edges, blistered spots, and a center that still feels tender. It is simple food, but not careless food. Its drama comes from heat, tortang talong. Tortang talong is a Filipino eggplant omelet that turns a whole vegetable into the center of the dish. The process begins by charring an eggplant directly over flame, usually gas, charcoal, or an open fire until the skin blackens and the flesh softens inside. That charring is not decoration. It gives the eggplant smoke, sweetness, and depth before the egg is ever added. Once cooked, the skin is peeled away while the eggplant is still warm, leaving the stem attached. The soft flesh is pressed flat into a wide fan shape, dipped into beaten egg, and fried until the outside turns golden. The finished dish keeps the outline of the original eggplant, making it instantly recognizable. It is often served with white rice and a dipping sauce made from vinegar, soy sauce, garlic, tomatoes, or banana ketchup, depending on the household. Filipino cooking carries influences from Malay, Chinese, Spanish, and American traditions, and tortang talong belongs to the broader family of torta dishes, meaning fried egg cakes or patties. But this version stands out because the vegetable remains whole rather than chopped into the egg. The texture is soft and smoky inside, with thin, crisp edges where the egg browns around the eggplant. Some versions add ground meat or onions on top before frying, turning it into a more filling meal, but the basic eggplant and egg form is the classic. The flavor is gentle but layered. The egg provides richness and structure, while the eggplant contributes smoke and faint sweetness. It is a breakfast dish, a lunch dish, and a home dish built from inexpensive ingredients transformed by one crucial step: fire. Tornado Omurice. Tornado Omurice is one of the most visually famous modern omelette dishes in Japan, but underneath the performance is a much older comfort food. Omurice began in the late Meiji period, or early 20th century, as yoshoku, Japanese-style Western food. Cooks combined fried rice, usually seasoned with ketchup or tomato sauce, with a thin omelet wrapped around it. The name blends omelet and rice, and the classic version remains common in homes, diners, and casual cafes. The tornado version takes that familiar base and turns the egg into a moving centerpiece. Instead of wrapping the rice in a flat sheet, the cook makes a soft, barely set omelet in a pan, shaping it through rapid stirring and turning until folds form in a spiral. The egg is then placed on top of the rice. When cut or opened, it falls outward in silky waves, covering the mound beneath like a sauce. The technique became internationally famous after videos from Japanese restaurants spread online, especially those showing chefs cutting into the omelet and letting it bloom over the rice. But the appeal is not only visual. The egg texture is extremely soft, rich, and custardy, creating a contrast with the sharper fried rice underneath. The rice may contain chicken, onion, mushrooms, ketchup, demi-glace, or tomato-based sauce, giving acidity and savoriness that balance the buttery egg. Making Tornado Omurice well requires timing, pan control, and confidence. The egg must be set enough to hold folds, but loose enough to flow. Too firm, and it becomes a normal omelet. Too wet, and it breaks apart. At its best, it proves that even a familiar plate of eggs and rice can become theater when technique is pushed to the edge. The spectacle matters, because the audience watches the egg change shape in real time, but the comfort remains the reason people keep ordering it. Beneath the spiral is still a familiar plate of warm rice and soft egg, only rearranged into something memorable. That balance between home cooking and restaurant showmanship is why Tornado Omurice travels so easily on camera and still makes sense on a plate today.